that he has done his MS and MSc from the prestigious AIMS Urology. Sir, we welcome you. Sir will be speaking on artificial intelligence and machine learning application to urology. Sir, please.
Thanks so much for your kind introduction. First of all, I express my sincere gratitude and appreciation for the organizing committee led by Professor Scott Z for making it possible to come up with a platform where we could share our knowledge and skills, which we have seen enough of that in the last couple of days. But also for me in particular, perhaps I'm the only speaker here who has emotional bonding to this institute. As you can see from the picture on the right side, it was 35 years back that I stood exactly at the spot where the chairpersons are in front of the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir state to get my first award when I was one of the toppers of my batch. How I reached to that position from a boy born in Karnal, and hardly I got my main ambition of getting into institute was to get MBBS and go back to my village. But before I could do it, my mother took me aside when I was preparing for my MBBS. She had no formal education. She was housewife, but she said one thing to me. She said, "You're planning to become a doctor, but I want to see you a good doctor because I have been to a neighbor just now. A neighbor was cribbing about an intern who tried to put a Ventron in her arm unsuccessfully. And she was cribbing that training in medical education is not good enough. Although she said in a chaste Pahari language which we speak, but she said something which I have always kept in my heart. What essentially she said was that you should always try for excellence and come out with the best training so that nobody else or nobody in the neighborhood would complain about it. I hope she's around somewhere listening to talk today, and the status I have achieved so far would make her satisfied to what she had seen a vision from me. Interestingly, from getting into the medical college and topping the institute and topping my batch, being one of the toppers of my batch, the story is that how I reached there. So when I came to medical school, I went to one of the classes run by Professor K.L. Chaudhary, whose daughter was my batchmate, she's a nephrologist in the United States. He said one thing to me, to everyone else around me, that there's no genius in medicine. If somebody says that I'm more smarter than others, that's absolutely lying. Each one of you have potential to be the best in this craft, provided you work hard, you dedicate yourself and remain focused. And that changed my mindset. With advice from my mother and from what advice I had from K.L. Chaudhary, it made me believe that I can achieve as good as anybody else. For a boy who studied his English alphabets from 6th standard to become a professor in one of the prestigious universities in the United Kingdom, it has been a long journey. And that journey was possible because I had the foundation which was laid in this institute. So it's a time for me to come back and repay that. I feel proud of that and I'm thankful to the organizing committee. My foundation in surgery and urology was possible because of the 3 institutes in North India. I went to PGI Chandigarh, spent 1.5 months. The first month I was not paid. I borrowed some money from Majid Jangi, who is still here, and I left for All India Institute of Medical Sciences, where I got surgery training. And I must say, I had the best training on this planet, which I realized later on. In 1997, when I passed my surgery exam, there was no seat in FMCH in that time, so I went to SDPJ Lucknow and spent a year of non-NCH. I had a wonderful time there. I came back, and under the mentorship of one of the panelists, Professor Ian Dogra, I finished my MCH. I was perhaps good enough to come back and get a job in skins, but I decided to leave this country not for the reason of money or for the reason of anything else, but it was more to have an ambition for myself. And what was that ambition? You have seen the speakers just now speaking about technology, speaking about how we could bring things together to look at the future. And I had a dream of bringing that together. That was not possible in this place. So I went and got trained. Most people who go from here end up in jobs which are paid as consultants for the NHS. To achieve a job of professor, those who have been to the United Kingdom would completely agree with me. It's a job which is only reserved for few. I had a dream that how could I bring together a center where the people from the basic science, people from the engineering background, and people from the clinicals like you and me sit together and co-create new knowledge, new skills to answer some of the problems which we faced and some of the issues which are likely to come in the next decades. And one of the problems is absolutely right what Professor Pushkit Guru said, is what we are getting trained today, we might not apply the same skills and knowledge in the next 2.5 decades or more than that. So what training we are giving to people today, is that the training they need for the future? Or do we need to train them in a flexible environment and give them the skills which they can adopt to any technology which is emerging? That's a question for us as teaching and training. Last year, I'm glad that the Vice Chancellor of my university called me. He said that I'm willing to open up this center, provided you give me assurance that this center will have self-sustenance. I heard Professor Khan yesterday speaking to the Secretary of Health and Education and asking for money to run a robot, but we were not fortunate in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, if you are a Dean of the School of Medicine, you need to ensure that you return 0.6% or 60% of the income of the institute through the faculty, which can bring grants, which can run the enterprises, which can work with the industry and have the input of financial input into organization, so that you can then have a choice of innovations, choice of free thinking, and choice of investing in yourself. I don't think the dean of this school, I may be wrong, has a plan that how much the human resources can return financially and make this institute self-sustaining. So that's something which I learned in United Kingdom. So this center will have significant input from the enterprise. That means you can link with industries, you can bring them in and work with partnerships so that you can answer some of the questions and also invest their money into generating knowledge and skills, which then can be translated into clinical practice. I heard a lecture of Professor Mallikarjun, and I was going to talk about that. We started in the Dundee Institute of Healthcare Simulation when we realized that people who are not trained, if they are put into clinical environment, is likely to have the injuries which would not only cause morbidity to the patients, but also cause a huge amount to the healthcare, including litigations. So we have Dundee Institute of Healthcare Simulation, where it's mandatory for a trainee to spend a significant number of hours inside the lab before you allow him or her to come into theater and practice on patients. It's almost unethical to practice on patients for the first time without spending significant amount in the labs. What we have done is we have matched our program to the Joint Committee of Health Surgical Training and provided the courses in DIHS where the people can come, train and go outside. We've trained around 65 countries. In United Kingdom alone, there is a population of 2.5 million which is benefiting from the training we have imparted. So this is how perhaps the labs needs to be established outside theaters, which can provide that training, which would enhance the skills and make sure the people whom they operate are safe and recovery as well as the cost of the procedures becomes less and less. One of the questions that people keep asking before I come to the artificial intelligence, which Khushi Guru is very keen to see, and for the first time I know Khushi for many years, he has told the secret of losing his hairs. Scotland and Kashmir have a huge link, and it goes right back to 1802, when the first allopathic dispensary was opened in Drupchen, which is a place next to Shankaracharya. And that dispensary was run for 50 years because it was handed over to two English men, and they ran for another 50 years. And then now it has been handed over to the government. But also there was a bishop in Scotland whose wife donated money to establish a hospital in Anantnag, which has now been converted under a different name, but it still exists, the building still exists. The hospital where we trained was opened by Marcos of Lilithrow, which is a place 10 miles from where I work. And of recent, if you have forgotten the past, Assi Kashmir was trained by Scotland, and Assi Kashmir has made a significant contribution to football. So there has been a significant contribution of Scotland in establishing both skills in sports as well as skills in healthcare. And as Kashmiris, we are never ungrateful, so I ended up in Scotland and I established the robotic services and other minimally access surgeries. And you can see that investment in training and teaching to staff anywhere is going to come back to you. That's what's happening. LMC treated our generations many years back, and we are treating his generations at this stage. So coming to the artificial intelligence, and this talk is mainly for making it very simple for postgraduates and for medical students. So there are plenty of definitions of artificial intelligence, but basically it means that you create a system outside the brain, outside the human brain, which can recreate the human brain function. And how do you do it? You use the computers, and that computer is called machine learning. And what's machine learning? There's a machine which needs data to analyze. And that data is analyzed in two ways. One is a basic machine learning, that's a basic statistical methods. The second one is deep learning. The deep learning is actually recreating the same kind of layers by layers analysis by brain, like what's called a convoluted neural network, or what's called UNet. So if you give an input, it goes through the same processing by the cells of the brain, so that you have an output, a decision which mimics as close as possible to the human brains. And how it's done. The basic to the artificial intelligence remains data, and you might have heard about the big data. Big data doesn't mean the big repository, somewhere located in your vicinity. It means that you have a complex data. For example, when we are holding these meetings, when we are operating in theaters, when we are walking or we're driving, we generate data which is a complex one, and it comes in different forms and shapes. So that data then gets fed into computers, and with the help of statistical methods, mathematical modeling, and advanced in computers, now we got the fast computers, it then comes out with a decision tree, and you can have multiple options how these decisions can be taken and what would be the outcome. Healthcare is not the only specialty where this is being used. In fact, for example, business. no business would run without having the data and without artificial intelligence, because they need the data for marketing, they need the data for growth and revenue generations. Artificial intelligence and machine learning has been possible because as we grow, we have more competence and more knowledge about computers. We know now, we understand statistics much better than what we used to do, and that has led to a number of companies designing the softwares where the data can be fed into those softwares and decisions are being provided as output, which can guide your clinical practice or any practice for that matter in any specialty. So how you gather data, it's very important that you need to have a clear system that you have data. Without data, you cannot do machine learning, and without machine learning, you can't have artificial intelligence. In Dundee, we realized that in the beginning of 2000s, that how we generate data. It's a small town, it's a population of 500,000. We designed a system of coding, which the community has indexed. Each individual in that area of around 600 square meter has got an index number which is unique to him, and we use that to track that patient where he goes into recovery, how he comes back to the general practices, and how he gets readmitted or up to his death. So each individual can be tracked within that area. So what we established is a system where this data could be fed, and we brought the scientists, mathematicians, data scientists, and clinicians together so that we could have a process by which the data is collected, it's anonymized so that the confidentiality of the patient is not lost, and how this could be linked with the systems, electronic systems, and finally, how it could be saved. So all the data generated by the healthcare episodes is kept in a safe haven from where it could be used. And the most important is the governance process, because we are more and more going to be challenged, both ethically and how we handle that data. So we have a system which is outside your practice and has independence to make those decisions so that anybody from outside can come and check that data, and that provides the validity of any publication coming out of that unit. So, for example, I'll just take you to a few slides to make you understand how we use it. I'm not going to go into treatments because treatment comes much later before, and you need to have precision in diagnosis. For example, you take an image, you look at it and decide whether this patient needs treatment or what's the diagnosis, whether it's inflammatory disease, cancer, etc. But that's not the only data you get. If you use the modern computer, you get more data, which is based on radiomics. What's the radiomics? So each image is made of pixels or voxels, like the wall is made of bricks. So you get computers to analyze that how these voxels, how these bricks are patterned. So for example, you look at the architectures, you can know that this architecture belongs to the Mughal era, Gupta era in the country, and that depends on the pattern. And similar to that, the machine can analyze how these gray level confidence matrices are arranged around, and depending upon that, it provides a picture which is similar to the picture which you can get with the biopsies. And in three situations, for example, it's the most common scenarios in my part of the world where I practice. You get a small renal mass, and we keep on discussing whether this could be a oncocytoma or it could be a tumor, which could be a chromophobe tumor. And I think the best radiologists in the world cannot sort that out. And how we can do it is to do biopsies. So you take a tissue and analyze under the microscope. Again, they look same. You do a bit of genetic analysis, you may add to your knowledge. And up to around 80%, you can get an idea that this is oncocytoma or chromophobe. But if you apply the knowledge of radiomics with artificial intelligence, you can get the data up to 95%. And there's no brainer that artificial intelligence, with the help of radiomics, is going to change your practice and perhaps avoid patient getting needles into body. How that data is handled is a number of ways. and there are a number of algorithms by which this could be handled. And each algorithm has variation, and that variation could be because of the mathematical modeling, or it could be that when you acquire image, you have different protocols in different machines, and that's where I think the future research is focusing at the moment. If you look at the biopsies from a paper published in European Urology, the diagnostic accuracy of biopsies is around 92%, and that's, I think, overrated because that paper, most of papers would include 9 diagnostic results into the positive diagnosis, positive means positive cancers. But if you use the artificial intelligence, you can enhance it up to 95%, 99%. So obviously, this is going to make a huge difference and avoid the complications of biopsies as well. So this is one area where artificial intelligence is going to make a huge progress. If you look at the tumor here, again, you take this picture to any of the radiologists and ask whether it's a T3 tumor or T2. And this is a study which was carried out between 2 radiologists, and they were asked how much you can predict that this tumor will be T3 after excision. And you can see that there was a variation between radiologists, but up to 0.6 they could predict that this is going to be a T3 tumor. But if you use artificial intelligence, radiomics, including the GLCMS, and analyze the data based on the pixels, you could predict up to 80 to 90% this is going to be T3 disease. So obviously, artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to perform better than most of my radiology colleagues in the future. Maybe this would be a tool in their hands. The other, one of the very fascinating disease, which is rare one, is our urothelial cancers. So whenever you see a picture like that, the first attempt from most of my colleagues would be, let's get a biopsy or proceed for radical nephrourectomy. But we realized recently that if you do biopsies, you're actually going to harm that patient in terms of increasing this risk of recurrence in the bladder. And how we have proven that is we have done the next generation sequencing from the tumor which was in the upper tract and compared it with the tumors which were coming back in the bladder, and we found that these tumors had similar genetic makeup, suggesting that these tumors were coming from the upper tract and getting implanted into the bladder. And we have also shown that if you do a biopsy prior to nephrourectomy, you increase the chance of recurrence in the bladder, and thereby the patients are getting back for recurrence and increasing the stage of disease as well. So actually, doing the biopsy and investing on technology is going to be less useful to patients. What's going to be more useful is how you can structure the architecture of this tumor based on radiomics and pixel measurements and analyze the data using artificial intelligence and machine learning and artificial intelligence. And this is one of the work which is ongoing in my lab. And we have shown from 250 patients who had nephrourectomy with the follow-up data using the radiomic that you can predict possibility of urothelial cancer up to 90-95%. I don't know how many you have experience of biopsying urothelial cancers, but up to 50% of times you don't get tissue you need for making diagnosis. With artificial intelligence, you'll be quickening the process pathway of the patient through the system, as well as it will provide better accuracy in terms of making a diagnosis. So radiomics is also going to be important in terms of prostate cancer, which is the commonest cancer where I practice. It's not uncommon, and Rishi can perhaps add to this, but it's very common that you do it biopsy, you get Gleason 6 or 7 disease. You do radical prostatectomy, up to 35% patients will have Gleason 8 or Gleason 9 disease. So it's called upgrading of disease. We have published a paper where we use the radiomic approach. We try to see the classical approach, which is based on the pyrite scoring, and you can possibly predict the upgrading of disease. But if you use artificial intelligence with machine learning, which we did, you can increase that up to 90%, because not all tumors need radical prostatectomy. Because we have seen the data from randomized control trials that you have to do up to 15 to 18 radical prostatectomy to save one life. that obviously shows that there's our treatment and our diagnosis. Using radiomics approach based on the imaging, you can increase your prediction ability up to 90%, whether this patient is going to be killed by the prostate cancer or he's going to be alive, so that you can tailor your information, and that would be useful for treating patients, perhaps saving money for our treatment. So the radiomics can also increase the precision. We have shown that if you add the genetic data, for example, you have taken a biopsy, you do the genetic analysis, you do the radiomic analysis, and you combine that together, you can increase the precision up to 97%, and this is one of the papers we have published recently. Also, in United Kingdom, there's a huge dearth of pathologists. So we are getting less and less people trained into the system for some reasons. And if you have artificial intelligence, you can actually perform better than human eyes. And there was a study which was carried out using 3 different pathologists with at least 5 years of experience. And this was compared with artificial intelligence. And on all stages of the disease, in terms of Gleason grading, artificial intelligence performed better than the pathologists. So obviously this has been fed into the system, and we have a plan that how we're going to implement in the future. So maybe you would see next generation pathologists using artificial intelligence to report pathology from patients. But more important is that you need to understand the behavior of the disease and how the disease progresses. What's the natural history of disease? If you don't understand the natural history of disease, you cannot design interventions. And if you design intervention, you put those interventions to wrong places. For example, sacral neuromodulation, I was glad Professor Srinagar completely agrees with that we don't understand the natural history of disease. And if you apply the intervention, it's not going to benefit patients. You may be wrong on certain occasions, and that's going to be harmful to the patients. How can you can understand the natural history of disease in biology, and that's the radiogenomics. So what we have done is we've taken the MRI pictures, we've done the radiomics from this, and we have also taken the histopathology and did some of the next generation sequencing. And actually, in most patients, you can see a correlation with these of some of the genes which are expressed. So actually, you can be very precise in telling that this tumor which is growing in somebody is going to harm him, are going to progress at a faster speed, and your treatment needs to be tailored to that treatment. Compared to somebody whose tumor is not going to progress because of genetic expression, and they would look the same on MRI. So this is going to be a future where you combine genetics and radiomics as well as the clinical features and come out with the prediction models. One of the things that Kushik mentioned was how we could use artificial intelligence in endoscopy. So one of my research programs is endorobotics using the flexible, and one of my lecturers is leading on that. You build up a system which can go with a flexible, which can be guided from outside and actually it goes into the body and visualize the tumors. And you take those features from the tumors and you can analyze using machine learning how the tumor is looking like, what's behavioral pattern, what's architect, what's the intensity of the image which is coming back. All that can be factored together to predict whether this tumor is going to be benign or malignant tumor. And if it's going to be benign, actually you can grade that tumor using the endoscope. We have done that for colonic polyps, which were easy to image compared to the other tumor, but we are now going to the bladder tumor. If you look at this tumor, which is looking like papillary, well, your eyes perhaps can tell up to 70% that this is going to be either grade 1 or grade 2 tumors from some of the results which I have seen. But if you use the artificial intelligence machine learning from the image, you can tell up to 90-95%, which is as good as taking biopsy. So you don't need to poke this tumor for the sake of confirming. You can only look at the image and you can tell what grade of tumor this is and what treatment it will need in the coming days. This is Obviously, the endoscope we have developed is a smart endoscope which can be manipulated inside from the external magnet, and you can move them inside the body and exactly know whether it's a polyp and if this polyp is benign or malignant. So that has been proven, and we are going to move to the cystoscope and ureteroscope. This is one of the ways we can avoid biopsies is looking at the tumor, taking its pictures, analyzing it, machine learning, and doing artificial intelligence. Whenever new things come up, you need to have a regulatory systems in place because everybody starts jumping at it. And WHO has realized they have put some safeguards how you handle big data, how you can do artificial intelligence and come up with recommendations so that those recommendations could be used across the globe. And there are few principles for that. It's very important the days of doing research in isolations have gone. We need to be collaboratives between the centers, between the countries, and there are guiding principles which have been put by WHO, and some of that is you need to have transparency in data. You need to make sure that there's a responsibility and accountability for those people who are holding that data. For example, if a paper comes from this institute, the person who has published that paper, he or she has to be accountable for the transparency of the data. And that's very important for us to share knowledge and skills between the centers. One of the, perhaps, one of the things which is most important that when something new comes up, for example, laparoscopy or robotics, everybody starts jumping at it and tries to publish the first paper. But these are the guidelines for publishing any paper for artificial intelligence. You need to look at your specialty, including urology, and look at there are only 2 or 3% of the papers which have changed practice. The rest of them are allusion to the literature and possibly being quoted in different ways, and that creates a lot of confusion in practice. Now we have put up the guidelines for artificial intelligence and medical imaging, and each paper which comes to the high impact journal, which is likely to change practice, we would ensure that the paper has already committed to these guidelines so that people get the best quality of evidence and guide their practice in the future. So that I'll stop my lecture, but I got my emails and I read a couple of journals. You're most welcome to be in touch anytime in the future. And the last thing is that we run a charity in my birthplace, which is far away from here. I know Kushi is doing great work in Srinagar and Sopar, but I think that some of the work needs to go to the rural areas, and this charity doesn't need money, but it needs the expertise of you guys to come and help the people in these areas, and I'm sure that will be more satisfying for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nabi. It's a really matter of privilege and pride for me, Dr. Seth, chairperson, to chair this session, which we believe, as at least I individually feel, that my knowledge is not that advanced that you have given such a advanced lecture that it was beyond our understanding, and we could catch up a little bit of this lecture. My question to you is, since the time is very short, do you think everything is good on this artificial intelligence? There is no downside of this? Because many CEOs of the leading companies, they are apprehending that this may damage the humanity in the long run. Because what we see as a human being, we are responsible for what is happening in the world, whether it's a good or bad or a disaster. We make something for a good, thinking today it's good for us. But after some time, we will realize that this will become a cause of concern and safety for human survival. So my question is, your lecture was fantastic, but is there any downside of this?
That's a fantastic question, and I briefly dealt in my presentation, but I haven't developed significantly in those areas. I completely agree with you. There are areas where perhaps it's going to cross the ethical boundaries. That's one of the concerns with WHO has taken.